What I've decided to do in terms of how to frame these remarks tonight is rather than talk in like technical design and planning language, um, I'm actually going to compare what I consider to be some of the really essential design and planning principles of a downtown, or in this case, a community, using the analogy of hosting a party at any of our respective houses. Okay, and I'll explain why. But the principal reason is it's something that we can all relate to, and that way we don't kind of get bogged down in techno speak about technical terms. Because I think, frankly, the reason I introduce myself often as a recovering architect is I don't want to be that architect or that planner who tries to make himself sound smarter than they really are. Because at the end of the day, I'm telling you straight up, design and planning is not rocket science. I'm willing to bet 90% unanimity, we understand intuitively what constitutes good design. The only thing we might lack is just how to express our opinions, and so hopefully tonight will help with that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to hold off to the end. I have a handout that corresponds to this talk, and the fun way to think about it, and especially Jim, who was our driver yesterday, you didn't know this, Jim, but the whole time we were driving, I was asking and answering the questions on this handout as I did my community tour. It is the dark tour inside my head. Whenever I show up into a town, these are exactly the things I'm looking for, the things I'm asking, and it's what helps me make recommendations. So let's jump right in. So again, we're going to talk about getting the house in order, and this is my home in Columbia, South Carolina. Believe it or not, it snows about once every decade. And, oh, sorry, we went too far. And I can tell you straight up, if my wife appealed to me and said, hey, let's throw a party around Christmas, I'd say, absolutely. But I can tell you this, probably like all the spouses in the room, you know, when your partner says, hey, we're going to throw a party, you pitch in and help. You know, I'm going to be out there cutting the grass. I'm going to be edging the lawn. I'm going to be sweeping it up. I'm going to be blowing away, trimming the hedges, blowing off the porch. You know the deal. And once I get inside, she typically is a better cook than me unless it involves a grill. And so I'm going to be doing the vacuuming. But the point is, we all pitch in and help. And so imagine the power of we've prepared the house. It looks really great. And so the night of the party shows up. And the time comes, and 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, I'm thinking, wow, this is a little bit more than being sociably late. And so I turn to my wife and I say, well, how many invitations did you send out? Who did you send to? She goes, well, I thought you were sending out the invitations. And the only point I want to make about this is to tee up what Ben's going to talk about in just a bit. To me, the equivalent of the party invitation is the promotions point of Main Street and the branding and marketing. It's precisely how you invite people to enjoy and participate in your place. Ricky, I just realized I'm kind of cutting y'all off, so I'll come over here if that helps. Or could y'all see good enough? So, but the things that Ben is going to show you tomorrow and even tonight by way of examples, those things are just so critical for you putting your best foot forward and telling your unique stories in a highly professional and I think equally important, consistent fashion. And so everything from the way you market yourself to the promotional events you throw, that is the equivalent of you hosting a party in the home that is downtown Rockaway. Okay? But wouldn't it be a shame if people did show up, and Ricky, I love what you said last night, and they get a poor first impression. Okay? Yeah. And so as pertains to, and of course Sherry will know this firsthand as a realtor, um, there's a concept that realtors always use for that first impression. It's what we call curb appeal. Okay, and it's that first impression. As soon as you pull up beside the curb, what you see, and it can be an impression about the house, it can be an impression about the lawn. But to Ricky's point yesterday, people form opinions about other human beings within about 3 seconds of each other. Exactly. And so you can imagine how quickly they also form opinions about the place based on what they see and experience. And that's why this first impression is so important. Now, to me, the place where you first make a first impression in a community is at what we call gateways. And thankfully, you guys have treated those in certain places. And, we were pulling in today from Branson, and I saw that stone, welcome to Rockaway Beach. It's really important. And one of the mistakes a lot of communities make is they only put those at sort of the corporate or municipal limits to a town. Guess what? The traveler couldn't care less. They have no idea. There is no imaginary line that's painted on the road that separates your county from another or your city from another. And so my advice to you, and don't get fixated on that design, my advice to you is whenever you feel like you've arrived in Rockaway, when that experience, you transition from what feels like some other place or the countryside to a place, every time you need to say, welcome. And when you do, you need to create treatments that speak to the authentic place and materials of Rockaway. And I think you've made a correct choice in the use of that stone. But at least something that just greets people, lets them know they arrive, perhaps it flanked by landscaping. Don't forget non-traditional gateways. There is no law that says a water tower has to be painted white or blue. You could paint it with your custom brand. Ben's probably going to give you some, I know he is, I've already seen it, some amazing brand material collateral tomorrow. Next time you have to repaint the water tower, slap that sucker up there. In this landscape, it's one of the first things you see well before you arrive. So go ahead and make that statement. I just featured this. This is what I helped with. Actually, this is from Lexington, South Carolina. And you can see that the only thing I'm pointing out is the fact that it uses materials that are similar to here. That stacked stone. Perhaps you want to either intimate or actually have functional water as a part, just because it's a part of the definition of your place. So that's the first principle, is those gateways. Make sure you make a good first impression. Great point you made there yesterday, Ricky. Now the second one is not quite as critical here as other places. Let me finish the thought and I'll explain why it's not as critical here, but it's what we call thoroughfares. Now thoroughfares are the connecting roadways between the gateways to your downtown or the core of your community. And so the equivalent in the house experience of the party would be the walkway from the road or the sidewalk to the front porch or the front door, and what that experience is like. And the thing I like to tell communities is I don't expect you to treat the thoroughfares with the level of detail as you will in the downtown, but please don't betray the beauty and experience you're going to have downtown by having a god-awful ugly thoroughfare leading in. So when I said this is relevant and not quite as relevant to Rockaway, is when you arrive, you're here. There's really sort of not much distance between a gateway and the downtown. So in a way, that's a benefit to you. But if there are parts of town that I didn't see, where you arrive at a gateway and then there's a stretch of road before you get to the core, then this would be applicable. And so I like to tell this story. This is Beaufort, South Carolina. The top is, this would be their main street. It's called Bay Street. And then one block behind these buildings is this bay. And it's just a stunningly gorgeous community. Are you showing Beaufort tonight or not?
I can.
No, you don't have to. I'm just, last week he did his brand new work from here. So as you can tell, this is a drop-dead gorgeous, stunning place. Matter of fact, if you're touring South Carolina, you just have to trust me on this. Charleston's fabulous, but I'll take Beaufort over Charleston because it has the same charm and about 10,000 less tourists per day. so really good. Here's the problem. First time I went to Beaufort, expecting to see this is what the postcards look like. This is what the main thoroughfare into Beaufort looks like. And I was like, whoa, this doesn't look like the postcard, not by any stretch of the imagination. And so, again, my point is, I don't expect that to look like this, but I think they could have done something to make it a little bit better, all right? Here is a really humble little town in the Mississippi Delta called Cleveland, where Ben and I had the privilege of work. And there was a main thoroughfare, and we wanted to create this one to be the secondary main thoroughfare into the downtown, but you can see that's not exactly the most appealing thoroughfare. And so here's some simple treatments. And the reason I picked these is basically anything we're showing here, you could use out here. I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying you could. And so first of all is placing banners on either existing or new poles. Planting trees at a regular spacing, perhaps doing something to demarcate and narrow the travel lane. Just for the record, the thing that will slow the motorist down the best and the most has nothing to do with a posted speed limit sign. Clearing the roadway, and or putting physical objects that they could hit. Okay, those are the things that will. Yeah. And so wayfinding signage, Ben will probably talk about that tonight and perhaps even tomorrow. But any of those gestures, you kind of layer them on top of each other, and all of a sudden you've introduced shade trees, you've introduced color, you've introduced directional signage, and all of those treatments together cause this thoroughfare, the downtown's even more handsome than this, but it at least now we're foreshadowing the good experience that you'll have. Now, the arrival, in my opinion, is the front door. And that's, we parked at the curb, we got the curb appeal, we come to thoroughfare, we walked up the drive, and now we're at the door, and by golly, that door better be operable, it better be using all the hinges, it better not squeak, it better not be rusty, it better make a good first impression. In my mind, the front door in the community of Rockaway as a whole is the downtown. Okay? And I didn't realize until a while ago how close you were to Eureka Springs. So I had the privilege of working in downtown Eureka Springs with Jacqueline a couple of years ago, and so you probably know where this is in the life of the city. Now, unfortunately, what's that?
On the right.
On the right, yeah. So here's the problem. My question is not going to work for you guys because you know the place, but everywhere else where I work, I say, so which way would you go downtown, right or left? And you kind of don't know.
I lived on the right.
Well, good. Well, and so we introduced these downtown district treatments. In other words, this is the same kind of treatment you would do for the downtown at a higher density and level than you do as the gateways. You announce arrival again when you get to this historic core downtown area. And so by virtue of the placement of the crosswalks, the placement of the banners, and none over here, the swoop of the stone, all of it you can see now visually is clearly leading your eye directionally towards the left. And so the point is not to highlight Eureka as much as to tell you, make sure when you come around the curve, and the gentleman has the house that I want to buy. Russ. Like when you come around the curve to those condos and everything, there needs to be a statement because it feels different. And so there ought to be a new statement. Matter of fact, where did I say was the condos you live in? They're flanked by two brick.
Yeah.
The first one, I would lobby with them, see if you could add something on this side at a diagonal. And there it says, welcome to historic downtown Rockaway. And do something at the other end. So that's the whole point of this is just make sure you re-announce arrival to this special district because this district is different and unique than any other place on the planet. Now the streetscapes in our downtown, or the parallel I would use would be the hallways in our house because they are the things, the roadways connect all the buildings and the streets and the houses, just like the hallways connect all the spaces inside of our houses. And here's something you need to know. Depending on the size and the layout of the town, the streets and the roadways are going to take up between 25 and 35% of the land area. And so the simple, obvious point is if you get the streets and the streetscapes right, you've solved a quarter to a third of all your planning issues in the downtown. So pay attention to this. It's really important to get this right. Ultimately, this is what we're after. Now, in your case, your streetscapes will look different. So I want to talk about principles, not actual materials. Principles are comforts for the pedestrian, shade, places to see and be seen. The human being wants to see and be seen. Creative activity that's always to the right or left as you're walking on these sidewalks. So there's a level of interest. People will walk farther than we think as long as it's a purposeful walk, it's a safe walk, and it's an interesting walk. Now when it comes to streetscapes and the roadways, I just made this up, but if you want to use it, I consider there are 4 critical C's that need to be taken. First is canopy, which basically means the trees, the tree covering. Corners, because they represent really important pause points in the life of your downtown. And me and Mr. Mayor have already had a conversation about the 5 places along your main street where the roads come in perpendicular facing the river, and we're going to be talking about those tomorrow. Third is crosswalks. And these are important both because of pedestrian safety as well as breaking up the rhythm of a long road, and then finally creature comfort. So here's first I want to talk about trees and canopies. So
What
this
was the last one?
creature comforts. So back to Lake City, South Carolina. This is a tiny town of 7,000 in the middle of South Carolina with no access to interstates or anything. And this was 2011 or 12. So as you can see, it is not the most attractive, adorable little town in the world. And this was this May. And the chief thing that I want you to draw your attention to are the trees. Look at the difference in the impact that just trees and landscapes make in addition to the buildings themselves. This is before, and this is the after.
Green forest before and.
Yeah, I mean, it is shocking, really, frankly. And so anytime you can infuse your downtown streetscape with plantings, trees, shrubs, especially flowers, anything that you can reduce color, it's one of the quickest way that just evokes this character of quality and care and concern. Now, I realize it's a maintenance issue, but, you know, this strikes me as the kind of place where people care about it, and they'd be willing to help out, not to mention the fact that you've got this faith-based community that has this history serving the community. So I'm confident if we can figure out a way to get the material, y'all will take care of it.
Plus, we can get some lawbreakers to put you in community service.
I will say I planted that planter down there last year.
Mhm.
All these pretty, and it was stolen.
Oh no!
I want to put roses.
You do it.
Keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. I mean, there's the story about New York City, when they cleaned up New York City subways and the broken windows, and they just kept doing it, and finally they gave up because the city was so dead set on getting those windows fixed and getting the graffiti off the subway.
So as I said, I really think corners are very important in the life of our downtowns. And again, you've basically got 5 little intersections on this stretch of Main Street, and I would encourage you to do a treatment in every one of these. This is from Mount Holly, North Carolina, where we did the master plan. Was that last year, Ben, or the year before? And I just love this because of the scale. It's such a small, tiny little intersection. But I don't know, there's something about it that I just love, between the crosswalks, between the icon in the middle of the road, the bump outs, the landscaping. It's like, it's shocking that a street could almost feel like a place, you know? I just want you to imagine, in your mind's eye, imagine if that occurred at the 5 places where these streets that come down the hill, you know, die into Main Street. If there was something like this, imagine what it would do for the motorist to see this repetition of these moments in your downtown. Now, you don't have to do everything that Mount Holly just showed. You can thank you to Keith for sharing these from Liberty, Missouri, where instead of actually saw cutting the roadway and having planter beds, they just use physical planters for the material, supplemented it with sculpture and art, and all of a sudden these corners now become these really important moments and attractive places in the life of the city. I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and again, everything you see here and here at their corners is completely movable. It is literally a pop-up, I hesitate to use the word park, but it's definitely a moment of,
Planter gardening.
there you go, but it's a place of rest. Again, what was the 4C, the creature comforts? You know, create these places where people can hang out. Crosswalks, I don't care what you use, whether you use pavers or stamped concrete or even creative ones, which I think you can easily pull off here. But again, those are the kind of things that do 2 things. Number one, it's going to cause the motorist to slow down, and more importantly, it's going to cause the pedestrian to feel safe. At the end of the day, and all you have to do is go look at these historic photos. Our historic downs were always meant for people. They were meant for walkers. And what I would enjoy is if philosophically, every time y'all made a decision pertaining to downtown, and particularly this Main Street out here, is the first consideration is what's best for the pedestrian, and then we will allow the motorist to drive through, but not the other way around. I don't think we ought to just plan this thoroughfare for the car and we'll allow the pedestrian to cross whenever they feel safe. No, it ought to be the inverse of that. And so finally would be the creature comforts. And those are the things you want to put in addition to the planters, just to make it comfortable for the person who's experiencing walking downtown, from the comfortable benches to the flags. You know, I always draw people to, this is Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a Great American Main Street Award winner. And just look at how much stuff is in the public realm that just layers on top of the experience. You know, you got the sandwich board, you got the trash can, you got the newspaper, you got the post, you've got the hanging baskets, you've got the outdoor dining, you've got the flags, you got the brick textures. And all of a sudden it just feels like a very rich and enjoyable place because of the layering of these colors and textures. It's not just a boring, plain, you know, concrete sidewalk. I'm fine with these sort of utilitarian benches, but I would prefer to sit in that one all day long. Okay. We'll come back to ways we might fund that in a moment. So we are finally going to enter into the core of our house, and to me, and the equivalent in our downtowns, that's the facades, that's the buildings. Because everything we've done so far, we've been on outside, but once we go inside and we leave the hallways of the streetscapes, we're going to enter into a room. Just like every one of our rooms in our house has a different function and purpose and size, it's the same in our downtown buildings. Every building has a different purpose, different size, sometimes a different style. And when they go inside and when they experience these buildings, that's when we're actually telling them this is who we are, this is what we value. And so I hope I'm going to encourage you and perhaps inspire you by these nasty buildings I'm about to show you from Lake City that have been transformed. Because I respect the fact that I'm not telling you anything you don't know. There's some buildings downtown that need to be restored and rehab, right? So it can be done. This is a very humble building. The after is not going to be terribly, terribly impressive. But I start with this one because it was my first one. So it's a sweet place in my heart. And I affectionately refer to this building as the ropes course building because I don't know if you can tell, the canopy, the awning, is being held up by 4 ropes that are tied off to the parapet.
Isn't that pretty?
And then you can see they use this diagonal ski lodge material. And so we pulled all that off, and this is what it looks like today. Again, this is not going to win any design awards, but I definitely think it's better than that. And another one, I like Ben uses this phrase all the time, and he's spot on. He says, don't underestimate the power of paint, the power of paint, the power of paint. This is going to be before and after a photography studio. And when you look at this, you realize, man, that looks nasty, but everything I'm going to show you in the after picture is just paint and art. And a really good client with a good brand system. So we were able to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the colors and the style and everything. So again, before, after, hopefully you like the after better. So this one, I have no idea why people put this stuff up. You know, you pull that white stuff down, you take the paint off the building, and lo and behold, there's a gorgeous building under there. Similar to this one, you know, the Booty Brothers. I love that name. I'm just kidding. This is the after. And then the last one, you know, who thought that was a good idea? And then you pull it off and you go back to the historic breaks, and there you go. And so, and by the way, that anchors one end of our main street. So a radical visual transformation, you know, in the past 5 to 7 years. So now I want to encourage you, because you may be thinking, yeah, 7 years. Well, how do we get there from here? The first thing is to buy yourself some time. Okay, it takes time and money to fix up these buildings. And so in the meantime, what are some things that we can do to buy time until we get an occupant and we fix up these buildings? And the first is I would encourage you to use what I call vacant building treatments. Important word you need to hear about this conversation is temporary, temporary, temporary. These are not meant to be permanent solutions. They're temporary things to just take the visual edge off of rundown, empty buildings, okay? Any downtown can sustain 1, maybe 2 empty buildings. You get a bunch, and all of a sudden it starts to send out a message, and people get a perception about the downtown. So one of the things we can do is we play some tricks temporarily until we can fix them up. So obviously one of the easiest things is just put art behind the windows. Just create, for lack of a better word, pop-up art galleries. Peoria, Illinois, all they do is took white butcher paper, printed this nostalgic streetscape scene. By the way, you've got tons of them, and look at them. I mean, they're just great scenes. Paste that up there, and then people are so drawn to the history and the nostalgia, they don't even notice initially that the building's empty, okay? Similar thing here, except we couldn't get on the inside of the building. This is Arkadelphia, Arkansas. This is a medical pharmaceutical company. They couldn't allow people to see inside. And so that we use that vinyl stuff they put on cars, vinyl car wraps, and just took historic postcards and applied it to the windows. And then finally, going back to Conway, South Carolina, 11 by 17 posters. You can print them on your own home printer. Simply says, I am Conway, and these simple statements of people like you that everyone knows. Why do I love this place? Why do I live this here? Why do I shop here? Why do I dine? Why do I invest? And you find yourself reading these posters about the people you rub shoulders with, it, you go to church with, the people your kids go to school with. And you don't even notice that the building's empty And the best part, of course, that hopefully it's building a community pride about why so many people love this place. So those are some things you can do in the short term as we're trying to get momentum, funds, materials, and labor to fix up the buildings. Parks and open spaces. If you're an introvert like me, this is where I'm going to seek out in the party. And I'm going to let my wonderful extrovert wife entertain the masses, okay? But I'm looking for the quiet place in the patio in the backyard. And in the life of our city, our parks and our open spaces do create those sort of green, comfortable pause moments in the life of our city. Of course, you've got a fabulous one. It's a very linear park right beside your river. But some principles to make sure happen there, as well as even green spaces on this side of Main Street, would be what I like to call flexibility and something for everyone. Make sure there's something for somebody's 8 years old, somebody's 18 years old, somebody's 80 years old. Those different demographics prefer different kinds of seats. They prefer different kinds of activities. And so make sure these green spaces are flexible in that nature. You know, some people prefer to sit in the sun, some prefer to sit in the shade, and make sure they're well lit so that they feel safe. And one of the simplest things you can do, even before you do anything physical to the place, is just program things inside of it. And I want you to hear this very importantly, because I think so often Main Street communities can devolve into just promotional event programs, and that's not the sum total of the program. Don't think everything has to be a festival. It can simply be 2 or 3 kids from the school playing guitars. It can just be yoga in the park. It can be simple things like that. It's just, I would rather you do more things, creating a visual appeal of activity and life, than just do a few huge things. And probably, frankly, that's going to spare you a lot of time and effort and money as well. So, this is our theater in Lake City that burned. So we saved the exterior of the facade. This was the old park that was there. And this was the new one that a colleague of Ben and I came up with. It's called Theater Park. And the thing I want to point out is, all I want you to do is just imagine superimposing relevant elements from this photo right out there. Imagine these super cheap plastic rocking Adirondack chairs in bright, colorful colors. These movable bistro tables and chairs. If you can't get any more trees, the benefit of these shade sails is look at the pop of color. And so from different parts of the city, you see these pops of color peeking around the buildings, and it just lures you into the place. Right now you have a lot of metal roofs that are painted all different colors, but you know, maybe that's a treatment you do out there. Not so much for shade, because you already have the shade from the trees, but more as that visual lure to just draw people down in there. And of course, I would be a big fan of restoring that go-kart. So, because that's when these places are the best, is when people are down there having fun inside of them. Which leads me to the perfect segue of the most easy to answer question of all time. You're throwing a party in your house. You vacuum the den. You put hors d'oeuvres up in the dining room. You put some in the study. You've got tables and chairs and opportunities to eat, drink, and fellowship in all parts of the house. Where does everybody end up? Absolutely, every single time, no doubt about it. And so the question is, rhetorically, what is the equivalent of the kitchen in the life of your downtown? Don't think literally. Think in terms of what Ricky just said. Where does everybody end up downtown?
In this town?
Well, yeah, we won't say the pub. So.
Yeah, I'd say, the dockside, that's where all the cars are always
That's
at.
the
Yeah.
only
Or a
place,
pizza cellar.
that's the only place there is.
Okay.
Or the fishing island.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would like the park, I go every morning to the park and do my workouts, etc.
Okay. All right. So, in reality, in other words, how would I phrase this? The place in the life of every city, regardless of its layout. In other words, here, the places you mentioned make sense for Rockaway. It wouldn't make sense in Columbia. I often say, if there's a gun to my head and I only get to fix up one part of any city, it's always going to be the sidewalks. And the reason is because everybody who's a pedestrian has to walk on the sidewalks to either get to your streetscapes, parks, your open spaces, or your buildings. And so if you can treat those, you're going to solve a whole lot of your planning issues in the downtown area. As I like to say, experience and environment trump architecture every single time. If you want to buy yourself some legitimate time until these buildings are done, sidewalks, fabulous. Ben lives in a great, great, great downtown called Greenville, South Carolina. This is a photo of it right here and right here. Great streetscape, 88 or more restaurants in just a couple block area, just lots of activities. It's fabulous. The architecture is just mediocre, and it just doesn't matter. When's the last time an architect was man enough to tell you that? Because all I'm telling you is if you can take care of the open spaces, the public spaces, it'll buy you some time to take care of the hard stuff of fixing the buildings. And so I want to introduce the concept of what I call vibrancy amenities. Vibrancy amenities. It's the things that we can put like, cornhole, giant Jenga, Scrabble, golf, artistic installations, movable tables and chairs. This is what we call a parklet. It's just a little couple of parking spaces created as a pop-up park, checkerboards. But here's the goal, downtown stickability. How many times have you heard the phrase, there's nothing for me to do downtown? Don't you get sick and darn tired of hearing that? So for far less money than an expensive streetscape or expensive facade work, you could populate the downtown with these vibrancy amenities and get a visual bang for the buck, and you get an interactive bang for the buck, because now families or people, especially people with families with kids, have something for them to do in the downtown so they stick around. And again, all of these things, I can see it out there, piece of cake. Bocce, I love playing bocce or cornhole. You've got those concrete pads where you can do Scrabble. Frankly, you could put this out in the go-kart place. But any of these things just create opportunities for people to come and experience. On the sidewalks themselves, maybe you do artistic installations. This lady's my neighbor. She took these propane tanks, welded them together. They become musical instruments as you sit in the bench chair behind it. And so it's interactive. People are hoarding those chairs all the time. The kind of boards where you get to get response. Yeah.
Are they chimes or?
No. You just play them like bongos.
Yes.
Bongos. But artistic elements, I've heard your story a while ago. Just people have a history in this town. You've come from other places. You've seen these sort of artistic elements. Let's start populating your public realm with these kinds of things. You've got a rich history of the arts and the crafts. Here's a simple thing that I guarantee you, your summer volunteers could build these. So our local elementary school and high school in Lake City, together with the Votech school, built these portable miniature golf courses. It took 4x8 sheets of plywood. Each had an artistic change. This one's made out of mirrors, different things. And what we do is we take this is where a building burned down, and we basically becomes a pocket park miniature golf course. We put all 9 holes there. Sometimes we separate them in the downtown, and you get to play through downtown. And so, again, for literally just a couple $100, we have a golf course in our downtown, a miniature golf course in our downtown. And again, I'm just a huge fan of colorful and especially movable chairs. Imagine the pops of colors if you put them down there in that Riverside Park, what it would look like. Now, you do have this option, and here I'm going to be less focused on grants than I am amenities, but by amenities I mean the public just does them. But if you want to fund vibrancy in front of private businesses, but in the public realm, you could take this approach. And these are the kinds of things that you often see out in front of businesses like bistro tables and chairs, like the benches, like these props, sculpture, roll-up doors, flowers and things. It's up to you, but to me, based on what I've understood about your demographic lately, I think y'all got the wherewithal just to make these things happen without having to go through the rigmarole of a grant. Lastly, I just want to show you this because I do know there's some places in your downtown where the sidewalks are narrow. This is from Holland, Michigan, but look at this. These are fold-down, fold-up tables. They don't take up much space. But the visual impact is actually pretty important in the public realm. So that concludes my remarks. And I hope what you saw is I've tried to be practical in the meantime and in the short term before we jump off the really difficult things that are going to take us in the medium and the long term. As I mentioned to you, the outline or my presentation follows, let me just, y'all take one and pass them down. These were the questions, and they are the questions that whenever I show up into a community, and we're doing a community tour, I took every one of the topics and I've written down in black and white the questions that I'm asking. I'm asking questions about the gateways. I'm asking questions about the thoroughfares. I'm asking questions about the downtown district, the buildings, the streetscapes, the parks and open spaces. And if you kind of think of a bullseye, I start here at the gateways, the thoroughfares, the downtown district, the parks, open spaces, and I just keep narrowing my focus so that nothing falls through the cracks. And my encouragement to you is to take this, and once you form your committees, especially a design committee or a design task force, I promise you, if you just drove and walked the downtown with that in hand and you asked and answered those questions, I feel fairly confident you're going to come up with a pretty thoughtful body of work that could form your action plan, okay? So let me stop the recording in case we have any questions.